Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive Academy building. The Galactic Military Academy stretched across the horizon like a metal mountain. Its silver walls reflected the orange light from Kepler Prime's twin suns. Jake had never seen anything so big in his 19 years on Earth. The gravity here was heavier than home. Each step felt like he was carrying an extra 30 pounds. The air tasted different too, with a metallic hint that made his nose twitch. He adjusted the straps on his bag and walked toward the main entrance. Other new cadets moved around him, but none of them looked human. Jake saw tall, thin beings with blue skin and 4 arms. Their movements were quick and precise. These had to be the Crixians he had read about. Near them stood shorter, gray creatures with large heads and big black eyes. The Thalorians were supposed to be the smartest species in the galaxy. A group of red-skinned aliens caught his attention. They moved with perfect coordination, like they were all thinking the same thoughts. The Veltar were famous for their military strategy. Each one could think through dozens of battle plans at once. Jake felt very alone among all these different species. He was the first human ever accepted to the Academy. Most of the galaxy still thought humans were too primitive and emotional to be good soldiers. Earth had only joined the Galactic Federation 2 years ago. "You must be the human," said a voice behind him. Jake turned around. A Veltar stood there, taller than Jake by at least a foot. His red skin had darker red markings that probably showed his rank. His 4 eyes studied Jake like he was looking at an interesting bug. "Yes, I'm Jake Morrison," Jake said. "I am Instructor Zefkar. You are assigned to Training Group Epsilon. Follow me." Zefkar walked fast, and Jake had to hurry to keep up. The Academy halls were wide and tall. Screens on the walls showed star maps and battle formations. Everything looked advanced and military. "Tell me, human," Zefkar said as they walked, "what makes your species think it can succeed here? Your people have no natural advantages. You are not fast like the Crixians. You are not smart like the Thalorians. You cannot think multiple thoughts like my people." Jake felt his cheeks get warm. "We're good at adapting, sir, and we don't give up easily." Zefkar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Adapting. Yes, I suppose that is one way to describe stubbornness." They reached a large room filled with cadets. Jake counted about 30 different beings from various species. Some were studying data tablets. Others practiced combat moves. A few meditated in corner positions. "Training Group Epsilon," Zefkar announced. "Meet your new classmate." The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Jake. He felt his heart beat faster under their stares. A female Veltar stepped forward. She was smaller than Zefkar, but her markings were more complex. "This is the primitive," they admitted. "The emotional species from the edge worlds. I am Thexera," she continued, looking directly at Jake. "I have studied your species. Humans make decisions based on feelings instead of logic. You sleep for 8 hours every day. You need food every few hours. How do you expect to keep up with superior beings?" Some cadets made sounds that Jake guessed were laughter. A Crixian clicked his mandibles rapidly. 2 Thalorians communicated through high-pitched sounds. "I'll do my best," Jake said simply. "Your best," Thexera repeated. "We shall see." Instructor Zefkar clapped his hands. "Enough, training begins now. Morrison, you will learn our methods. We use logic, calculation, and proven tactics. Emotion has no place in military leadership." The first exercise was a strategy simulation. Each cadet received a data tablet showing a battlefield scenario. They had to choose the best tactical response from multiple options. Jake looked at his screen. Enemy forces approached a defended position. The choices were retreat and regroup, hold ground and fight, or advance and attack. Jake studied the terrain and unit strengths. His gut feeling said to retreat, but the logical choice seemed to be holding ground. Around him, other cadets finished quickly. Their fingers moved across tablets with confidence. Jake was still thinking when most others were done. "Time," called Zefkar. Jake had chosen to hold ground. It seemed like the most logical option. Zefkar reviewed everyone's answers. "Most of you chose correctly. Hold ground and fight with defensive bonuses. Morrison, you also chose this option, but you took twice as long as anyone else. Speed of decision is crucial in real combat." More exercises followed. Physical training was hard in the heavy gravity. Jake's muscles ached after just a few minutes. The Crixians moved like liquid lightning. The Veltar maintained perfect formation. Jake stumbled and fell behind. During mental exercises, the Thalorians solved complex problems in seconds. Their large brains could process information much faster than Jake's human mind. They answered questions before Jake even finished reading them. Lunchtime came, but the food synthesizers weren't programmed for human nutrition. Jake got something that tasted like cardboard mixed with metal. His stomach rumbled, but he ate it anyway. Having trouble, human? Thexara sat down across from him. Several other cadets joined her. I'm fine, Jake said. You are clearly struggling, said a Thalorian named Vexnil. Your response times are slow. Your physical performance is inadequate. Perhaps you should return to your home world before you embarrass yourself further. Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting mad wouldn't help anything. I just need time to adjust. Adjustment, Thexara said. Another human weakness. We adapt immediately to new conditions. You require time to learn what we know instinctively. After lunch came weapons training. Jake had never used energy weapons before. The laser rifle felt strange in his hands. His first shots missed the target completely. Other cadets hit perfect scores on their first tries. By evening, Jake felt exhausted and defeated. He lay on his narrow bed in the dormitory. The gravity made even lying down feel heavy. Through thin walls, he could hear other cadets discussing the day's lessons in their various languages. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Jake knew he was behind everyone else in almost every area, but something inside him refused to quit. Maybe that was what made humans different. Maybe stubbornness really was their strength. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep despite the strange sounds and smells of this alien world. He would find a way to succeed here. He had to. 3 weeks into training, Jake felt like he was drowning. Every morning started the same way. He woke up tired because the artificial lights never fully turned off. The air recyclers made a humming sound that kept him from sleeping well. His human body needed more rest than his alien classmates. In strategy class, Instructor Zefkar presented battle scenarios on the main screen. Today we study the Battle of Zirion Prime. The defending force had 3 options. Who can identify the optimal choice? Thexara's hand shot up immediately. Defensive position Alpha 7, using terrain advantage to channel enemy forces into a kill zone. Correct, Zefkar said. The logical analysis shows this choice maximizes enemy casualties while minimizing friendly losses. Jake had been thinking the same thing, but Thexara answered before he could even raise his hand. This happened every day. The Veltar cadets could process battle scenarios instantly. Their minds worked like computers, calculating every possibility at once. During physical training, Jake struggled even more. The Crixians moved so fast they looked like blurs. Cadet Zixtal completed the obstacle course in 43 seconds. Jake needed over 2 minutes. His human reflexes felt slow and clumsy. Perhaps the human should try a different career, Zixtal said, his mandibles clicking with amusement, maybe farming or construction work. The other cadets made their species versions of laughter. Jake felt his face get hot, but he said nothing. Mental endurance tests were worse. The Thalorians could focus their large brains for hours without getting tired. Vexnil solved mathematical equations while memorizing star charts while analyzing tactical formations, all at the same time. Jake could barely handle one complex task without losing concentration. Your mental capacity appears limited, Vexnil observed after Jake failed another multitasking exercise. Perhaps human brains are not evolved enough for military command. Food remained a constant problem. The synthesizers made nutrition paste based on each species' needs. Jake's portion tasted terrible and left him hungry. He lost weight while other cadets stayed healthy and strong, but Jake started noticing things about his classmates that others missed. The Veltar always chose the most logical option, even when it might not work in real life. During one simulation, Thexara picked a strategy that looked perfect on paper but required perfect timing. Jake thought about how real battles were messy and unpredictable. Perfect timing rarely happened. The Crixians relied too much on their speed. When Zixtal faced a puzzle that needed careful thinking instead of quick reactions, he made mistakes. He would try to solve problems fast instead of thinking them through. The Thalorians had the opposite problem. Their big brains could think about too many things at once. Sometimes they got stuck thinking about every possible outcome instead of making decisions. Jake watched Vexnil spend 10 minutes analyzing a simple tactical choice that should have taken 30 seconds. Jake began to understand that each species had strengths, but also weaknesses. The problem was that academy training only focused on the strengths. Nobody talked about the blind spots. In his free time, Jake studied his classmates more carefully. He read about their homeworlds and cultures. The Veltar came from a planet where everything was organized and logical. Their society had strict rules for every situation. They were good at following proven methods, but bad at handling unexpected problems. Crixian culture valued speed and quick decisions above everything else. Their homeworld was dangerous, with fast predators and sudden storms. Quick reflexes kept them alive, but this made them impatient with slow, careful planning. Tellurians lived on a world with huge libraries and vast databases. They learned by studying endless information. Their culture rewarded knowledge and analysis, but too much thinking sometimes prevented them from acting. Jake realized something important. Each species was trained to fight the way their people had always fought. They used tactics that worked on their homeworlds against their traditional enemies. But what if they faced something completely different? During weapons training, Jake started doing better. His human hands were good at using tools. Earth animals had developed fine motor control over millions of years. While other species had natural weapons like claws or mandibles, humans had evolved to make and use complex tools. The energy rifle felt more natural after weeks of practice. Jake's accuracy improved steadily. He still wasn't the best shooter, but he was no longer the worst either. One day, instructor Zefkar introduced a new type of exercise. Today you will face scenarios with incomplete information. You must make decisions without knowing all the facts. This was different from normal academy training. Usually, cadets got all the data they needed to find the one correct answer. Now they had to guess and take risks. Jake found this exercise easier than his classmates did. Growing up on Earth, humans faced uncertainty all the time. Weather could change suddenly. Technology could break down. People could act in unpredictable ways. Humans had learned to make the best decisions they could with limited information. Thexara struggled with the exercise. She kept asking for more data before making her choice. Insufficient information for proper analysis, she complained. In real combat, you often lack complete intelligence, Zefkar replied. You must decide anyway. Jake made his choices quickly based on instinct and experience. He got some answers wrong, but so did everyone else. The difference was that Jake felt comfortable with uncertainty while his classmates felt frustrated. After class, Thexara approached Jake. For the first time, she didn't sound hostile. How do you make decisions without adequate data? Jake thought about how to explain it. I guess I use my gut feeling. I think about what feels right based on past experience. Gut feeling, she repeated slowly. This is emotional decision-making. We are taught that emotions lead to errors. Maybe, Jake said. But sometimes logical analysis isn't enough. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts. Thexara looked confused. Her people had trained for generations to ignore emotions and trust only logic. The idea of using feelings to make military decisions seemed dangerous to her, but Jake had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. Maybe there was more to human thinking than primitive emotion. Maybe Jake's different approach could teach her something new. That night, Jake felt slightly less alone than before. He was still behind in most areas, but he had found one place where his human nature might actually be an advantage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since arriving, Jake felt a small spark of hope. The morning announcement echoed through the dormitory halls. All Training Group Epsilon cadets report to Simulation Base 7. Midterm evaluation begins today. Jake felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. The Crucible was the Academy's most important test. Every cadet would command a virtual fleet in a complex war simulation. The test would last an entire week, and failure meant expulsion from the Academy. In the simulation bay, 30 individual pods lined the walls. Each pod contained a command chair surrounded by holographic displays. Jake climbed into his assigned pod and felt the neural interface connect to his mind. Suddenly, he could see and feel everything in the virtual environment. Instructor Zefkar's voice came through the communication system. Cadets, you will defend the trade hub of New Geneva against an overwhelming invasion force. You each command identical fleets with the same resources and support units. The scenario is based on real historical events. Use everything you have learned about military strategy and tactical doctrine. Jake's displays activated, showing him the star system around New Geneva. The trade hub sat at the center, a massive space station where dozens of species conducted business. 3 asteroid belts provided mineral resources. Several planets offered strategic positions. His fleet appeared on the tactical display. Jake commanded 50 warships of various classes, plus support vessels, fighters, and defensive platforms. The enemy force was 3 times larger and would arrive in waves over the next week. Around the simulation bay, Jake heard other cadets immediately begin implementing their strategies. Commands flowed rapidly as they positioned their fleets and prepared defenses. Thexara's voice carried across the room as she coordinated with her virtual subordinates. Establish defensive line Alpha at coordinates 445-221. Deploy screening elements according to Veltar Doctrine 7. Jake recognized the strategy from their classes. It was a proven defensive formation that had worked in dozens of historical battles. The plan would create layered defense lines to maximize enemy casualties while preserving friendly forces. The Crixian cadets chose aggressive hit-and-run tactics. Jake could hear Zixtal rapidly issuing movement orders. His ships darted around the system like angry insects, striking at enemy scouts and retreating before the main force could respond. The Thalorian approach was more complex. Vexnil was building elaborate supply lines and calculating optimal resource distribution. His strategy would support a long siege while slowly wearing down the enemy through superior logistics. Jake stared at his displays and felt overwhelmed. All the standard approaches seemed to be taken. Maybe he should copy one of the proven strategies. But something bothered him about the scenario. Instead of moving his fleet, Jake began studying New Geneva itself. He examined the civilian population, their culture, and their history. Most cadets ignored civilians as obstacles to protect or assets to evacuate. But Jake remembered reading about Earth's military history, where civilian populations often played crucial roles in conflicts. New Geneva housed over 10 million beings from 40 different species. They had their own governments, trade disputes, and cultural conflicts. Some species had historical enemies among the invading force. Others had trade relationships that might be exploited. Jake also studied the enemy force composition. The invasion fleet came from the Hegemony, a militaristic alliance that had conquered dozens of worlds using overwhelming force and terror tactics. Their strategies relied on fear and the assumption that defenders would fight conventionally. While other cadets positioned their fleets, Jake spent hours analyzing psychological profiles and cultural data. He studied how the Hegemony had won previous battles and, more importantly, how they had lost the few times they were defeated. "Morrison," came Thexara's voice over a private channel. "What are you doing? The enemy advanced scouts will arrive in 6 hours and you haven't moved a single ship." Jake looked at his tactical display. She was right. His fleet remained in starting positions while every other cadet had deployed their forces. It looked like he was paralyzed by indecision. "I'm still analyzing the situation," Jake replied. "Analysis should have been completed hours ago," Thexara said with frustration. "You are falling behind already." But Jake wasn't paralyzed. He was developing a plan that none of his classmates would expect. Instead of fighting the battle the way the Academy taught, he would fight it the way humans had learned to fight on Earth. When the first enemy scouts arrived, Jake's fleet was ready. But his response confused everyone watching. Instead of engaging the scouts in battle, Jake's ships performed what looked like a panicked retreat. His forces scattered and ran toward New Geneva in apparent disorder. "The human is breaking already," Zixtal commented. His nerve failed at the first contact, Instructor Zefkar observed from his monitoring station. Jake's retreat violated basic tactical doctrine. The correct response was to gather intelligence while maintaining fleet cohesion. Instead, Jake's forces looked like they were fleeing in terror. But Jake wasn't running away. He was implementing the first phase of his plan. His scattered ships weren't fleeing randomly. Each group had specific orders and destinations. Jake was deliberately appearing weak and disorganized to make the enemy overconfident. The enemy scouts reported back to their main force. The Hegemony commanders received intelligence that the New Geneva defense was collapsing before the battle even started. They accelerated their attack timeline and committed more forces than originally planned. Meanwhile, Jake's fleeing ships took positions throughout the civilian areas of New Geneva. To outside observers, it looked like Jake was hiding behind innocent civilians. In reality, he was positioning his forces for the next phase of his strategy. Jake opened communication channels with New Geneva's civilian leaders. Instead of just protecting them, he began recruiting them. He explained that the Hegemony would enslave or destroy their homes regardless of surrender. The only choice was to fight together. The civilian population began organizing resistance networks. Traders provided intelligence about enemy supply lines. Engineers offered to modify civilian ships for combat. Even non-military species found ways to contribute to the defense. Other cadets focused purely on the military aspects of the simulation. They thought about ships, weapons, and tactical positions. Jake thought about people, motivations, and psychology. He was fighting a completely different kind of battle. As the first major enemy wave approached New Geneva, Jake's plan entered its most dangerous phase. His fleet would have to face superior numbers with unconventional tactics. Everything depended on the enemy reacting the way Jake predicted they would. The other cadets watched in amazement as Jake's scattered forces suddenly coordinated in ways that made no tactical sense. Ships appeared where they shouldn't be. Attacks came from impossible directions. The human was either completely insane or incredibly clever. Time would tell which one was true. The enemy fleet arrived at New Geneva like a storm of metal and fire. Over 200 hegemony warships dropped out of hyperspace and began their assault. Jake watched from his command chair as other cadets engaged in conventional battles across the star system. Thexara had positioned her forces in perfect defensive formations. Her ships fought bravely from fortified positions, trading space for time while inflicting maximum casualties. The strategy was textbook perfect, but the enemy had overwhelming numbers. Slowly, her defensive lines began to collapse. Zixtal's hit-and-run attacks hurt the enemy but couldn't stop their advance. His fast ships darted in and out, striking at supply convoys and isolated units. But the hegemony had expected this kind of harassment. They had brought enough forces to absorb the losses and continue their advance. Vexenil's complex logistics system kept his forces well supplied for a long siege. His carefully calculated resource distribution allowed him to maintain steady resistance. But even perfect logistics couldn't overcome a 3-to-1 disadvantage in firepower. One by one, Jake's classmates began losing ground. Their conventional strategies worked exactly as designed, but the enemy simply had too many ships. The simulation was testing their ability to handle overwhelming odds, and traditional tactics weren't enough. Jake's approach was completely different. While his classmates fought the enemy fleet, Jake was fighting the enemy's expectations. The hegemony commanders saw Jake's scattered forces and assumed they were facing a broken defense. They launched aggressive attacks against what appeared to be easy targets. But Jake's ships weren't where they seemed to be. He had learned something from studying Earth's military history. Humans had often faced superior enemies throughout their past. They survived by being unpredictable, by making the enemy fight on unfamiliar ground, and by turning apparent weaknesses into strengths. Jake's first trap was simple but effective. A group of enemy ships chased what looked like a fleeing human squadron toward New Geneva's asteroid mining facility. The enemy expected to destroy the human ships and capture the valuable mining equipment. Instead, they found Jake's forces waiting in the asteroid field. But the trap wasn't just the hidden ships. Jake had convinced the civilian miners to rig their mining charges throughout the asteroids. When the enemy fleet entered the field, explosions erupted all around them. The asteroids themselves became weapons. Chunks of rock accelerated by carefully placed charges slammed into enemy ships at incredible speeds. The hegemony forces found themselves fighting both Jake's fleet and the environment itself. Impossible, Thexara muttered as she watched Jake's tactical display. Using civilian infrastructure as weapons violates the laws of war. But Jake wasn't violating any laws. The civilians were defending their own property using their own resources. Jake had simply coordinated their efforts with his military forces. It was unconventional but perfectly legal. The enemy commanders were confused and angry. This wasn't how space battles were supposed to work. Their tactical computers hadn't been programmed for opponents who used mining equipment as artillery. Jake's second trap was even more creative. He had noticed that the hegemony fleet included species that were natural enemies of each other. Political alliances held them together, but old hatreds ran deep. Jake began broadcasting fake communications on enemy frequencies. His messages were designed to sound like different hegemony species were planning to betray each other. The fake intelligence was subtle and believable, based on real historical conflicts between the species. Suspicion began to grow within the enemy fleet. Units started watching each other instead of focusing on the battle. Some ships even opened fire on their own allies when coordination broke down. The human is using psychological warfare, Vexenil observed with fascination. He's making the enemy fight themselves. Instructor Zefkar watched Jake's tactics with growing amazement. Nothing the human did followed standard military doctrine, but it was working. The enemy fleet was becoming less effective with each passing hour. Jake's most brilliant move came when he realized that the hegemony relied entirely on fear and intimidation. Their whole strategy assumed that defenders would be too terrified to fight effectively. But fear only worked if the victims believed they were helpless. Jake organized the civilian population of New Geneva into a massive intelligence network. Millions of beings with different skills and access points began feeding information to his forces. Traffic controllers reported enemy ship movements. Merchants identified supply weaknesses. Even children playing in observation decks spotted enemy scout positions. The hegemony found themselves fighting an entire population instead of just a military force. Every civilian became a potential spy. Every building might hide defenders. Every communication channel could carry resistance messages. This type of warfare was completely alien to the hegemony's experience. They had conquered worlds by breaking the will of military forces and terrorizing civilian populations into submission. But New Geneva's civilians weren't cowering in fear. They were actively fighting back. The enemy began making mistakes as stress and confusion grew. Ships moved out of formation to chase false targets. Commanders issued contradictory orders based on misleading intelligence. The disciplined hegemony fleet started to fall apart. Meanwhile, Jake's own classmates were struggling with their conventional approaches. Thexara's perfect defensive lines couldn't adapt to changing situations. When the enemy tried unexpected tactics, her logical responses weren't flexible enough. Zixtal's speed became a disadvantage when Jake's chaotic battlefield made it dangerous to move fast. Several times, Crixian ships nearly collided with friendly units because everything was happening in unexpected ways. Vexes. Nil's careful calculations broke down when Jake's unpredictable actions changed the variables faster than the Thalorian could process. His big brain couldn't handle a situation where the rules kept changing. One by one, Jake's classmates began withdrawing from the simulation as their forces were overwhelmed. Their tried and tested strategies weren't working against an enemy that had been confused and demoralized by Jake's unconventional warfare. By the end of the fourth day, only Jake and Thexara remained in the simulation. The Veltar cadet had adapted some of Jake's techniques, but she still relied fundamentally on logical, predictable patterns. The final confrontation was about to begin. Jake faced his most challenging opponent with an enemy fleet that had been reduced to chaos. Everything he had learned about human warfare was about to be tested against the best strategic mind in his class. The outcome would determine not just who won the simulation, but whether human military thinking had a place in the galaxy. Only Jake and Thexara remained in the simulation. The other 28 cadets sat in their deactivated pods, watching the final confrontation on the main display. None of them had expected the human to survive this long, let alone be in the final round. Thexara had learned from watching Jake's unconventional tactics. She stopped using purely logical strategies and began incorporating some unpredictable elements. Her Veltar mind struggled with this approach, but she was intelligent enough to adapt. "Impressive, Morrison," she said over a private communication channel. "You have forced me to think in ways my people have never considered. But now you face a superior opponent who understands your methods." Jake studied his tactical displays. Thexara commanded the largest remaining enemy force, and she had positioned them cleverly around New Geneva's outer defenses. Her ships weren't in the standard Veltar formations anymore. She was trying to be unpredictable like Jake. But Jake realized something important about his opponent. Thexara was still a Veltar, even when she tried to act differently. Her culture had trained her for thousands of years to think in logical patterns. She could imitate unpredictability, but she couldn't truly embrace it. Jake decided to use this against her. Instead of being unpredictable, he would do something completely logical. He would make the most obvious move possible, knowing that Thexara would expect him to do something clever instead. Jake ordered his entire fleet to advance directly toward Thexara's position. No tricks, no hidden traps, no psychological warfare. Just a straight attack using conventional tactics. It was exactly what any academy textbook would recommend, and exactly what Thexara wouldn't expect from him. Thexara's sensors detected Jake's advancing fleet immediately. She analyzed the attack pattern and felt confused. This was too simple, too obvious. The human had to be planning some kind of trap. She spent precious time looking for Jake's real strategy. Her ships remained in defensive positions while she searched for hidden forces and secret weapons. But there weren't any. Jake was actually doing exactly what he appeared to be doing. By the time Thexara realized that Jake's straightforward attack was genuine, it was too late to respond effectively. Her forces were positioned to counter clever tricks, not direct assault. Jake's fleet smashed through her confused defenses before she could reorganize. The final battle was swift and decisive. Thexara's ships fought bravely, but they had been caught off guard by Jake's simple tactics. Within 2 hours, her command ship was destroyed and her forces were scattered. The simulation ended with Jake's complete victory. For the first time in Academy history, a single cadet had defeated every other member of his class. The achievement was even more remarkable because Jake was human, supposedly the weakest species in the galaxy. Silence filled the simulation bay as the pods opened. Jake climbed out on shaky legs, his body stiff from days of neural interface connection. Around him, 30 of the galaxy's most elite young military minds stared at him with expressions of shock and confusion. Instructor Zefkar approached with slow, measured steps. His 4 eyes studied Jake like he was seeing him for the first time. "Cadet Morrison," he said finally, "your performance in this simulation has been unprecedented." Thexara was the first classmate to speak. She walked directly to Jake, her red skin darker than usual with what might have been embarrassment. "I underestimated you," she said simply. "Your final move was brilliant in its simplicity. I was so busy looking for complexity that I missed the obvious solution." "But how?" asked Vexneal, his large Thalorian brain struggling to process what had happened. "Your species lacks our natural advantages. You cannot think as fast as we do. You cannot process as much information. Yet you defeated us all." Jake thought about how to explain it. "Maybe that's exactly why I won," he said. "You're all so good at your specialties that you expect everyone else to fight the same way. But humans learn to survive by being different, by adapting to whatever situation we faced." Zixtal clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "The human used our strengths against us. When we were logical, he was unpredictable. When we expected unpredictability, he was logical. We could not anticipate his methods because they changed constantly." Other cadets gathered around Jake, asking questions about his tactics. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Jake didn't feel like an outsider. His classmates were treating him as an equal, even as a teacher. "Morrison," Instructor Zefkar called out, "report to my office after debriefing. The academy leadership wants to discuss your performance." An hour later, Jake sat across from Zefkar in his private office. The Veltar instructor seemed different somehow, less certain than before. "You have created a problem for us, Morrison," Zefkar said. "For generations, this academy has taught military doctrine based on logic, calculation, and proven methods. Your success suggests that our methods may be incomplete." Jake felt nervous. Had he done something wrong by winning? "Sir, I only used the training you gave me, combined with what I learned growing up human." "Exactly," Zefkar said. "You brought something new to our established system. Your human instincts, your emotional intelligence, your ability to think like your enemies instead of just outfighting them. These are skills we have never taught because we never understood their value." Zefkar activated a communication device on his desk. "I am recommending you for advanced tactical training, Morrison. But more than that, I am recommending that humans be invited to contribute instructors to this academy. We need to learn from your species as much as you learned from ours." Jake felt overwhelmed. He had come to the academy expecting to struggle just to graduate. Instead, he had proven that human thinking had value in galactic military strategy. "There is one more thing," Zefkar continued. "Your victory today will become part of academy legend. Future cadets will study your methods for generations to come. How does it feel to know that you have changed military education throughout the galaxy?" Jake thought about his journey from the struggling outsider to the cadet who defeated an entire class. He thought about his classmates who had become friends and teachers. He thought about the message he would send to his family on Earth. It feels like being human isn't a weakness after all. Jake said with a smile. Maybe it's our greatest strength. Outside the office window, the twin suns of Kepler Prime were setting, painting the academy in shades of gold and orange. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But today Jake Morrison had proven that humans belonged among the stars, not as servants or laborers, but as leaders and innovators. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again.